In the last video, I introduced you to the MuleSoft Catalyst and the 3 pillars of the Catalyst, and we left that session with an introduction to the 7 principles of the Catalyst. So in this video, we'll look at the principles in more detail. So first of all, let's do a quick recap about the 3 pillars, as it's important that you fully understand these pillars. The 3 pillars are business outcomes, technology delivery, and organizational enablement. In later videos, we'll talk more about these pillars and to a greater depth, but at this stage it's enough for you to know that each engagement must have a well-defined, documented and funded business outcome. Technology delivery will be dependent on the desired outcome, and we'll look at this in more detail in future videos. And finally, the organization must be enabled to deliver the outcomes of the other 2 pillars. Now, there are some things around organizational security and those sorts of things which might affect technology delivery, but we will cover that in more detail later. Organizational enablement is extremely important and generally, in my experience, provides significant challenges which I'll address in a video of its own, probably later in this series. So now on to the 7 core principles, and for the sake of keeping to the 10-minute video length rule that I talked about in the first video, I will cover the first 4 principles in this video and then the last 3 in the next video. The reasons will become obvious hopefully, and then we'll summarize all the principles again so that you have a complete overview. So it's not surprising, given the business outcome pillar, that the first principle is outcome based. The Catalyst methodology follows an outcome based approach. This approach must ensure that the technology which is built and the programs and projects which are delivered in pursuit of the business outcomes have a clear and measurable link to the defined business outcomes. Given the personalities and roles of people surrounding a delivery, it's easy to become distracted by competing outcomes, funding issues, and people of different influences and desires. And the nature of competing roles and desired outcomes brings me nicely into the second principle, which looks at balancing short-term and long-term views. Undoubtedly, as a Catalyst specialist on an engagement, you will come across a scenario where short-term demands will be in conflict with longer-term objectives. And this is where your skills as a specialist will need to come to the fore in order to make the case for balancing the 2 views. Remember, at the start of the engagement, I talked about defining the business outcomes and developing the roadmap to deliver these outcomes. Now, the aim is to make incremental improvements and deliver increasing but measurable business value over time. By delivering in the incremental fashion, and we'll talk more about agile ways of working in future videos, the business can continue to build towards the long-term vision while avoiding, at best, technical debt, and at worst, going completely off course. In order to deliver the long-term view, we need to take into account the 3rd principle, platform as a basis for solutions. Now, the Catalyst allows us to build and maintain a foundational platform that can support shared services, but in addition acts as the host for multiple solutions as we progress along the visionary pathway that we've defined for ourselves. It's important to remember here that the separation of the platform and the solutions it is hosting has a number of advantages. It's likely that there will be multiple development teams working on the platform. And by separating the platform from the developers, you have the benefit that developers can focus on design and development and implementation, of course, without having to think about supporting the platform itself. The core platform team, on the other hand, can focus on infrastructure and common frameworks and services that they can then offer to the development team. It's a symbiotic relationship between the two. Now, other benefits quoted for the separation of the platform are ease of administration via common platform and common frameworks and services, simplified metrics and shared KPI dashboards, and the provision of a consistent DevOps toolchain for configuration management and release processes. Now, the fourth principle is that of decentralization, and I've written a lot about decentralization on my substack.com and medium.com blogs. So I'll put a link somewhere up here to them in this video so that you can read more details if you wish to do so. Historically, a lot of businesses that I've worked in have established one or more centers of excellence. These centers of excellence, which we know as a COE, were seen as experts in their areas and had the task of building and enforcing standards, providing governance and improving quality of output from the delivery teams. Now, unfortunately, in just about every case I've seen, this approach failed due to the C of E, Centre of Excellence, becoming a bottleneck and too slow, and therefore forcing development teams to try and bypass them in order to meet their deadlines. Catalyst, therefore, takes a different approach by recommending a decentralized and lightweight Centre for Enablement, often referred to as the C3. Now, the focus for a C3, and this is true for the C3 that I lead, is to enable a number of different development teams to deliver their integrations using common standards and a defined and constantly refined best practices. One of my core functions here is to enable the building, provisioning, and evangelization of knowledge about integration benefits and practices. So the C3, in my view, and the view of the Catalyst, which is probably more important given the aim of these videos, is to enable the development teams across the business to design, develop and deliver production-ready APIs using well-defined standards and best practices, plus reusing common APIs and core fragments that have been developed for use on the platform. And because the C3 functions in a decentralized way, organizations should be able to scale at a faster rate through development team enablement. They should not worry about bottlenecks associated with a Centre of Excellence. If there are any, then the C3 is not set up properly and needs to be reviewed and changed. And finally, the C3 can support development teams across the whole business regardless of their maturity level with the development of APIs. So that brings us to the conclusion of the first part of the course on Catalyst principles. And just as a quick recap, we have covered outcome-based as the first principle, balance short and long-term view as the second principle, platform as the basis for solutions, and finally decentralization. In the next video, I'll cover the three remaining principles. So these are products in addition to projects, focus on composability, and finally, number 7, don't reinvent the wheel. In addition to that, I'll cover some exam tips on Catalyst principles, and we'll go into a little bit more depth and have a review. So I hope to see you in the next video. If you have learnt from this one and you are interested in following the course, then please consider subscribing to the channel. Give this video a like. And as I always say, if there are any comments or questions, which I have had some, thanks for those, then I will get round to answering them as best as I can and as quickly as I can. And if something crops up that is of particular interest, then we can try and do another video at a later date to address those issues. So I hope to see you in the next one, where we finish off the 7 principles of the MuleSoft Catalyst.